With most traditional narratives, the hero usually wins. You might say it's reflective of our own desire to see ourselves on top, and that the hero's victory is a self-serving component that's necessary in telling a good story. After all, the archetypal hero seeks to balance the scales of justice, to restore a sense of peace, and rid the evil or the villain from his or her seat of influence. Yet even when Macduff kills Macbeth, or when Beowulf kills Grendel, or when the Avengers cop out and use time travel to kill Thanos, a morbid curious side of us might have us questioning, what if the villains triumphed? The same might therefore be asked of the big bad villain for many believers of the Christian faith. What if Lucifer's rebellion was successful? What if Lucifer could not be bested in combat? And ultimately, what if Lucifer won? The role of Lucifer in the biblical narrative is fairly straightforward. Most scholars combine the account of chapter 14 of Isaiah with the account of chapter 12 of Revelation to establish Lucifer as the perfect angel, who had essentially grown too big for his boots. According to Isaiah, Lucifer sought to exalt his throne above the stars of God, and ultimately believed that because of his own beauty, intelligence, and strength, he ought to have been God instead. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning! How you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations! For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation, on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. By Revelation, we see that Lucifer's ambition culminated into a great war in heaven, which saw Lucifer convince a third of the angels to join his cause against God. We are also told in this chapter that Lucifer adopts the form of a menacing seven-headed dragon, and that he takes the fight to God directly. Yet here, Lucifer is foiled, for he meets resistance in the form of the Archangel Michael, and the remaining 2/3 of the angels who had stayed loyal to God. Here we learn that Lucifer and his forces were not strong enough, and they lost their places in heaven. Revelation reads, "The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him." We aren't explicitly told of the fate of the angels who had sided with Lucifer, though it can be inferred that they were cast down with Lucifer, having lost their place in heaven, and that just as Lucifer underwent his transformation here into the evil Satan, believed in some interpretations to have lost his divine beauty and grace, and incurred a more vile and grotesque form, so too did these fallen angels adopt a more wicked and sinister nature, effectively becoming evil spirits or demons upon the earth. As we can see from this narrative, Lucifer is undoubtedly the loser in this great confrontation. Whilst he is later allowed to hold some threat over mankind, Revelation specifies that he wages war against any who continue to follow Jesus' teachings. There is a suggestion here that this is a sorry existence for one who was once so grand and holy, and that this new role as the enemy of mankind is much less substantial than his original ambitions. But if Lucifer had managed to overcome the forces of Archangel Michael, and had managed to defeat God in combat, then what would the remainder of the narrative look like? Well, the most glaring difference is that there probably wouldn't have been any humans in the first place, at least maybe not in the way we know. If we are to consider the idea that Lucifer defeated God, this being in a time before humanity was even thought about, then chances are that humanity would never have been created at all. After all, Genesis tells us that God created man in his image, and if that's the case, then we have reason to believe that Lucifer, even if he did possess the ability to create, would have created something entirely different. What's more, given what we know about Lucifer's character, he is prideful, conceited, and arrogant. Certainly not someone who appeared to have been capable of demonstrating compassion for anyone other than himself. Therefore, he probably would have never have even conceived the notion to create humanity at all, because he would have no intention of being responsible for them. Even if he did eventually decide to create man, again, we're assuming he even possesses such an ability, then it's likely they would be created in his image, haughty, cavalier, wicked, and superior. Would these then be our default characteristics? Somehow, I don't see Lucifer as being the paternal type of deity, if we could even call him that in the wake of God's defeat. After all, shooting Jesse James doesn't make you Jesse James. What's more, if Lucifer did create humans, then it's likely he would only tolerate them so as to bask in their worship. But again, if they weren't present during his rebellion, then there's little reason to believe he'd have wanted them around at all. Furthermore, it's possible that Lucifer would have been content to have ruled over the remaining angels, who would undoubtedly have had no choice at this point but to have recognized him as the Most High. Additionally, in the event that Lucifer did not execute Michael and those angels who remain loyal to God, it's possible that Lucifer would have kept them around to gloat, possibly as prisoners, who would live the remainder of their existence in either servitude to their new god or on their knees in perpetual, albeit forced worship. A more unconventional idea is that if Lucifer did manage to succeed in his rebellion and triumph against God, then realistically the world wouldn't actually look all that different. In fact, it might look indistinguishable from the lived reality of the everyday believer. Think of it like this: even though Lucifer is shown to be wanting to raise his throne above God's, he still wanted to be like God. In Isaiah 14, he is noted as saying, "I will exalt my throne above the stars of God." Then subsequently, in the same section, he is noted as saying, "I will be like the Most High." This then might give believers the impression that the world Lucifer cultivated in the aftermath of his victory wouldn't be all that different from the world recognized today. In his efforts to be like God, Lucifer emulates that which God had already decreed, perhaps even followed the same blueprint that God had laid out. You'll notice that despite his insurrection, Lucifer is never that detailed about what he wants, besides being recognized as the Most High. Most rebellions usually have a desire for change at the heart of their movement. It is the determination to see one system overthrown in favor of a new system, a sentiment that serves as the very lifeblood of the revolt. Yet Lucifer doesn't seem all that keen on changing anything, at least it's never detailed for us. He seems to take no qualms with the way God has ruled, nor with how heaven or the earth are governed, and doesn't seem all that interested in human, animal, or even spiritual affairs. The only thing that doesn't sit right with him is that he's the one not being worshipped. Ultimately, Lucifer's rebellion is born out of his own selfish and narcissistic need to be recognized, not because he means to implement great change, but because his pride and arrogance have deluded him into believing that he is simply the Most High. Therefore, if Lucifer did win, there's reason to believe that he would rule in much the same way that God did. At least, he might try at first. This usurpation would have likely gone one of two ways. Either Lucifer would assume the position of God and alter the history of the rebellion to make it look like it never happened, or he would intend for everyone to know he had killed God and taken the throne for himself. In the first scenario, Lucifer plays into his more deceptive tendencies. He would have already silenced Archangel Michael and 2/3 of the angels at this point, so there wouldn't have been anyone to challenge his illegitimate ascension. His own angels would have likely been sworn to secrecy, or at least scared into silence by this point, so it's unlikely they would have spoken about it thereafter either. Humanity would be none the wiser. No one else would have known there was a conflict in heaven at all, much less that the divine power had changed hands. This would undoubtedly be the safer, wiser option for Lucifer to have pursued, and yet something tells me that he wouldn't have been able to stand that he was merely in disguise of God, and not recognized as Lucifer the usurper, the brilliant angel who was so strong he slew God and took his kingdom. No, Lucifer most certainly emulates the traits of the classic narcissist. He could have ruled just as he always wanted to, albeit under the guise of God, but I'm willing to bet his ego would never allow him to sustain such a masquerade. He'd want people to recognize what he'd done, that he'd overcome all the odds, and slain the old almighty god. And what's more, he'd have likely wanted to have been celebrated for such a feat. Propaganda would have been spread about the previous god, about the former angels, and whilst I don't think Lucifer would downplay these characters, for it would dilute the magnitude of his victory, but he would most certainly have painted them in a darker, more disagreeable light. Ironically though, it's possible that if Lucifer did go down this route, his intended audience, assuming he chose to create humanity or something equivalent, may have seen through his facade and come to the conclusion that the bad guy won, thus then reaffirming the belief in the former god and rejuvenating a desire for a would-be messiah who could deliver them from this evil imposter god. Indeed, Lucifer's need to distinguish himself from the previous god may have caused the exact opposite intentions, where humanity would realize that Lucifer was not a god at all, but merely a god killer, and that where the previous god could supplement his vengefulness with mercy, Lucifer did not. Therefore, it's possible that humanity would come to merely tolerate Lucifer in the beginning, but after realizing he had only a fraction of the power that the previous god did, they had come to reject and shun him altogether. On the other hand, whilst Lucifer's greatest challenge would be maintaining the illusion of omnipotence, he could still deceive humanity, again assuming he chose to or even found a way to create them, into believing that he was the supreme being. The logic would be difficult to refute, especially seeing as this would-be humanity wouldn't know any different. As the so-called father of lies, deception would naturally become his weapon of choice. He would shroud himself in the mantle of godhood, commanding fear and reverence, not exactly through divinity, but through illusion and manipulation. Now, to suggest that Lucifer is powerless would be a great misconception here. Remember, in the book of Job, we do see him inflict several terrors upon Job, including afflicting his body with sores, killing his livestock, and crushing his children under the roof of his house. Though Lucifer can only act with God's permission in this narrative, the scope of his destruction is clear. Indeed, this only transpires because God allows Satan to do this in order to settle a little wager that Job would still be loyal to him. But the implication here is that Satan, or Lucifer, does indeed wield this sort of power. With God out of the picture in our little scenario, it would mean that Lucifer could in fact go around doing these sorts of things to any creature he pleased, and there would be no one tugging at his leash to restrain him. In the traditional sense, Lucifer, as Satan, comes to despise humanity once he has fallen, and sees the corruption of humanity as his last-ditch attempt to stick it to God. He knows how much God loved his human creation, and so he also knows how much it would hurt him to see them so easily deceived and lured off the righteous path. Ultimately, it's the only method by which Lucifer could continue to demonstrate his grudge against God, indirectly ruining his favourite creatures and denying them of eternal paradise. With God defeated in our extra-fictional scenario, again before the creation of humanity, Lucifer would have no humans to corrupt unless he continued God's original plan and chose to somehow bring them into being. If this was the case, it's not hard to imagine that he would continue punishing humanity just for kicks. He wouldn't have vaporized them from the earth as God does with the deluge, but rather might have celebrated their debaucherous and sinful lifestyles, and probably even encouraged them. Moreover, it's unlikely he would eliminate humanity in its entirety, because then, who would worship him? Being wicked would likely become the status quo amongst humanity, whereby evil deeds were rewarded by Lucifer, whilst good deeds were punished. It's no stretch to say that the concept of morality would be flipped on its head, whereby Lucifer, seeking to deviate from God's plan and craft humanity in his own image, celebrated the impulses and characteristics that were more like his own, whilst vilifying the honourable and more benign aspects of humanity that were believed to be representative of God's goodness. If Lucifer was able to create his own version of humanity, it's unlikely that he would ever come to love them in the same capacity that God did, but rather would only keep them around as a means to extract his own glorification. A more outlandish but fascinating notion arises when we consider the fate of Michael and the angels who opposed Lucifer. In the traditional account, Lucifer and his followers are cast out of heaven, losing their angelic grace and descending as demons, beings of malice whose purpose is to tempt, torment, and corrupt humanity. Yet God does not annihilate them. Instead, he allows them to roam the earth as agents of temptation, a test for mankind. Through their deception, the righteous are distinguished from the wicked. Those who resist demonic influence prove themselves worthy of divine paradise. But if we invert that paradigm, if Lucifer triumphed and claimed the throne, then the question must be asked, what became of Michael and the loyal host? It would seem logical that Lucifer, unlike God, would have no reason to preserve his defeated foes. God allows evil to exist as a test of faith, but Lucifer would have no interest in such trials. Humanity's salvation would not concern him, for humanity would likely not exist. In that case, extermination might appear to be the most pragmatic course of action, wiping out Michael and his angels completely, leaving none who could challenge his rule or remind him of heaven's former glory. Yet one could just as easily imagine Lucifer's ego taking a darker satisfaction in their survival. For a being defined by pride, what greater victory was there than to force one's enemies to live beneath the shadow of their defeat? Rather than destroy them, he might cast them down to the mortal plane, not as angels triumphant, but as remnants of a lost order. Their continued existence would serve as a cruel monument to Lucifer's supremacy, a living testament that heaven had fallen. In such a reversed world, it creates an interesting dynamic between the would-be humans and these angels. The angels would play a role akin to the demons of our own theology, wandering the earth, whispering to humanity. Yet their whispers would not be temptations towards sin, but faint calls back to righteousness. They would not corrupt men, but strive to redeem them, urging them to remember the light that once was. These displaced angels might move unseen, guiding the kind-hearted, comforting the faithful, and quietly rebelling against Lucifer's new dominion. They would become, in essence, the new outcasts, holy insurgents in a kingdom of darkness. Just as demons now test mankind through temptation, these angels would test them through conscience, urging mortals to resist the false god who ruled them through fear. Their mission would be a spiritual resistance, small unseen acts of grace in a world abandoned by it. The first issue worth addressing is what I've come to call the God problem. According to scripture, God is not merely a creator, but the architect of everything, matter, spirit, and time itself. With that power comes the ability to unmake creation just as easily. This is demonstrated from the earliest passages of Genesis, when God, disgusted by the corruption of mankind in the antediluvian world, drowns every living being save for Noah and his family. It's a terrifying reminder that within this biblical God's hands lies both mercy and complete annihilation. Against such power, Lucifer's rebellion seems almost laughably futile. Yet it also reveals the depth of his pride, that he could, even for a moment, believe he stood a chance at usurping the Almighty. Perhaps in his arrogance, he reasoned that victory was not impossible. After all, he was said to be the most brilliant of angels, the morning star itself. One might imagine that with cunning and strategy, he could outmaneuver the Archangel Michael in battle, even with just a third of heaven's host. Perhaps Lucifer believed that sheer intellect and strategy could compensate for numbers. History, after all, has seen improbable victories before. And yet, this brings us back to the inescapable paradox, the God problem. Even if Lucifer had triumphed over Michael, his victory would have been hollow. The moment he stood before God's throne, the rebellion would end. Not even with a dramatic final battle, but with a mere thought. God could erase Lucifer from existence, reverse time, or rewrite the outcome altogether. he could quite literally undo the war with a single act of will. That is the essence of the God problem. In a universe governed by an omnipotent creator, every rebellion is doomed before it begins. We see this in Genesis, where Nimrod fails to complete the construction of the Tower of Babel, or where Jacob is stalemated as he physically tries to overpower God. Any and all resistance is assuredly put down, and so in a reality where Lucifer wins, you'd be forgiven for thinking that such a victory would last only as long as God would allow it to. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to leave this video a like and subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.